Swivel cables have become increasingly popular in the last few years, and some people really really like them and some people don't. I did a little bit of a search online, especially on Reddit, to see what people had to say about swivel cables, and there were varied opinions. I have tried 3 different brands of swivel cables now, and I thought they were really great, but there was one problem I was having with them. Then recently I tried them on a different type of project, and I had to unscrew my needle tips and attach them to a regular cable. So in this video I'm going to talk about what swivel cables are and what the point of them are, what they may be good for, and some things that maybe they're not so good for, and some of the problems with swivel cables. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you're new here, my name is Anniken. I design knitting patterns, I teach knitting workshops online and in person, and I sell yarn through our website YarnAddict.co.uk. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. Thank you to everyone who watched last week's video, last Tuesday's video, which was a video where I talked about why some people knit a lot and why that upsets some other people, and it was in response to all the videos and social media posts at this time of year of what people knitted last year. And some people get quite upset, I would say, or stressed about seeing that other people knit a lot, which I find interesting. And I just did a little video about it and gave my opinion on these issues. And basically the moral of the story is it doesn't matter how much you knit as long as you're enjoying it. But that video got an awful lot of traction, so it is my most popular, probably my most popular video to date, I think, considering it's only been out for a week. So if you watched that video and you have subscribed because of that, I really really appreciate it, because we have loads of new subscribers. I'm really really thankful. Thank you very much. So if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you hit the subscribe button if you want to be notified every time I upload a video, which is normally on Tuesdays and Fridays at the moment. Then click the notification bell. And if you have any opinions or any comments to make on what I'm talking about today, or you want to share any tips or views with me, leave them in the comments below. So the swivel cables that I have tried are from Nipro, their Mindful collection, Lantern Moon and Chowgu. And my most recent ones are Chowgu, which I only got in December. So let me just talk about what swivel cables are and what they actually do. So swivel cables, the connections actually twist independently of the needle. So if I turn this needle around, it doesn't move the cable at all. Let me untwist this one. And these are the Chowgu swivel cables. So if I twist the needle tip, the cable doesn't move at all. If I take a pair of regular Chowgu with the original red lace, I think they're called, and I twist those needle tips, you can see the whole cable move. Can you see that? The whole cable is moving. So that is what the swivel cables do. They allow the needle tips to move independently of the cable. Some people have problems when they knit in that the needle tips on interchangeable needles gradually unscrew as you knit. I've had quite a few people in my workshops who've said they tighten the needle tips before they start knitting when they're using interchangeable needles, and then it gradually does unscrew as they knit. And I've never been sure the reason for this. To start with, I was thinking, well, you're obviously not tightening it properly. And sometimes if it was in a workshop, I would actually tighten it for them to make sure it was tightened properly. But some people are absolutely certain they tighten it properly. And I have seen it happen in workshops where I've tightened it, and I'm sure that it's as tight as I can get it, and then it gradually unscrews. I've had needles unscrew on me during projects, but they're usually needles that I've had in my project bag for a while. I've either used them on a big project that's taken me a while to knit, or when I finish them, I will just put them away in my needle case without unscrewing the tips from the cables. And then next time I need that needle size, I'll just pick them up and not check the connections, make sure they are tightly screwed on. I'll just start knitting with them. It's always worth checking, make sure they are tightly screwed on before you start knitting. but it can be a problem that they can come unscrewed, and swivel cables may help with that. Also, as you knit, sometimes depending on what you're knitting, especially when you're knitting in a round, I seem to particularly have a problem with this when I'm knitting on magic loop. Sometimes the cables can get very kind of kinky and they can twist and feel a bit unmanageable. That's less of a problem with swivel cables. The swivel cables I've used a lot recently are my Lantern Moon ones. So I have some Lantern Moon needle tips, which I quite enjoy knitting with. They are very similar to the Knit Pro Symphony needle tips. I did a review on Lantern Moon needle tips, I don't know, last year. Yeah, it must have been last year, I think. And I compared them to the Symphony needle tips from Knit Pro, and the shape of the needle, the slope at the tip here, and the point is almost identical. Or is identical, I would say. And they are both owned by the same company. Lantern Moon is owned by Knit Pro, so I would imagine they are made on the same production line, just this is a different wood. This is ebony wood, I believe, and these are quite a bit more expensive than the Knit Pro Symphony needle tips. But if you don't necessarily want the ebony wood and you're happy with the Symphony needle tips, which are also wood, they're like brown, is it brown and purple? I don't know, it's sort of dark wood. I don't have any here to show you. They're dark wood, but they are slightly variegated, and they've been around for quite a long time now, and they're still very popular. But if you like wood but you're not bothered about having the ebony wood or the name Lantern Moon, you can buy the Knit Pro Symphony tips and then use the Lantern Moon cables. You can also use the Knit Pro do also now do their own swivel cables. I know they definitely do them in their Mindful collection because I have some, but I think they do them in their other collections as well. And I would imagine most needle producers now do the swivel cables in the interchangeable ones and the fixed circulars, but I mainly use interchangeables, so that's my main experience with the swivel cables. By the way, another little needle tip, the Lantern Moon, all the Knit Pro interchangeable needles and the Likia interchangeable needles, or Likey as many people pronounce them, but the correct pronunciation is Likia because it is a Norwegian word and I am Norwegian. They all fit the same cables, so if you have cables already but you just fancy trying different needle tips, you don't necessarily need to buy new cables. I actually use these Lantern Moon cables on my Likia needle now more than I used to Likia cables because I prefer these cables because they are the kind of memory free ones, so they don't kink. So even if you twist them up and you store them like I do, and you untwist them, they are nice and smooth, which is using these Lantern Moon needles quite a lot in the last year, especially when I'm traveling because they're wood. So I'm assuming I may have less problems getting through airport security with them, although I've never had a problem with airport security, but I know people who have. So I think if I take wood with me, that might be better. On the trip to Norway, I took these 4 needles with me, plus the needles that were in my project, plus a set of sock needles, which are also in a project at the moment. So I took 3, 4, 5 metal needles and 1 wooden needle, but I am actually thinking about getting a full set of the Lantern Moon in the size I use the most to take with me when I travel, just because I think it is easier. I thought the swivel cables were really good and I've used them quite a lot in the last year, but I did notice that on some projects the yarn was catching. So if you don't screw the tip on properly, here where the joint is, see if I can screw this off. It's screwed on quite tightly. I can't unscrew it. Oh, this one, managed to screw that one. So if your needle tip is not screwed on properly, can you see here how you have like a, hang on, can I do this? You see here, there's like a little bit of a gap. So if your yarn's catching, that's usually where it's catching, on this little gap, because your needles aren't screwed on properly. But I was noticing when I was using this, sometimes the yarn would catch, and I knew it wasn't because the needle tip wasn't screwed on properly, because I checked that every time it happened. But sometimes it would catch a little bit here. And the thing is, because this needle tip moves independently of the cable, if I pull it back and forth like this, there is a bit of movement that way in and out as well here. So it's nothing to do with the fastening here where the tip screws on. It's all here where the cable goes into the metal bit. And if I move that a bit, it does move back and forth a bit. Only a teeny tiny bit, but I have noticed that with certain yarns sometimes it would catch a little bit here, and every time that happened I would just check that my needles were screwed on properly, and they were. So it does sometimes catch there, and that was annoying. But I mainly use these because my lantern moons are 3.5 and 4mm, so I mainly use them on slightly thicker yarns, so 4-ply, DK yarns, that kind of thing. I hadn't used them with lace weight yarn. And then recently I needed some more Chow-Gu tips because I am really short on Chow-Gu cables, especially in certain sizes, the smaller sizes, 60 and 80 centimeter. I always seem to be running out of those cables, whether I lose them or whether I have too many projects on the go, who knows. So the Chow-Gu swivel cords are called Swivel 360, I think. I did actually have a pack here with a cable in that I hadn't opened yet, and it was here this morning when I started work, and now I can't find it. But I attached these to a pair of 3mm needles in December when I ordered them, because I was about to cast on for a new sweater, and I thought, as I've got these shiny new cables, I will use those. And I was knitting a sweater in a lace weight alpaca silk yarn. It's a yarn that has about 800 meters per 100 grams, so it's like a fairly standard lace weight yarn. And if you watched my recent podcast last week, you will have seen I'm talking about the grey beaded sweater that I knitted on my recent trip to Norway. And I was using these cables. I cast on, I started knitting with these cables, 3mm needles, these are bigger needles actually, and this cable. And I was knitting along, and the yarn kept catching on the swivel joint, and it was driving me mad, and I couldn't quite understand it because I've knitted with this yarn before. I've knitted 3 sweaters with this yarn before, so I knew the yarn was fine. It wasn't the yarn that was the problem as such, it was the yarn and the combination that was the problem, because there is a bit of movement here in, just like the Lantern Moon ones, in the Chow-Gu there's also a little bit of movement here. I can pull it in and out a little bit, and the yarn would be catching there. And I think with the thicker yarns like 4-ply and DK, that's not such a problem. I would feel it catch, but it wasn't a problem. But with the lace weight yarn, it was really getting caught, and it was quite frustrating. And I ended up having to change back to a regular red cord to knit that sweater on because it was just driving me mad. Although I think swivel cords are really good, and especially for things that you're knitting in the round or on magic loop. And you might say, well, you're using circular needles, wouldn't you be knitting everything in the round? And no, not necessarily, because most things I knit on circular needles are actually knitted back and forth. But if you're knitting in the round, especially in my experience when you're doing things on magic loop, I find the swivel cords really good. But I will not be using them again when I'm using lace weight yarns, because I was finding that really frustrating, and I think I was only spending like an evening or two knitting with it before I changed, and I was much happier once I changed onto the regular Chow-Gu needles. So obviously, as with everything, there is a preference. Some people prefer certain needles, some people prefer others, that's fine. So some people may really love swivel needles, some people may not. But for me, the main problem is using them with thinner yarns. So if you often use thinner yarns, you might find swivel cables more frustrating. But I haven't had a problem with them, although they do catch a little bit sometimes. It's not enough to bother me when I knit with DK and 4-ply yarn. But with the lace weight yarn, I will not be using my swivel cables again. Otherwise, I really like them. So let me know if you've ever tried swivel cables. Do you like them? Do you not like them? Would you try them? Based on what I've told you in this video, especially if you find that your needles aren't twisting or the needle tips aren't screwing, or you find, especially doing magic loop and things, if you find that the way the needles are moving and twisting frustrating, I would give swivel needles a go. So if you're finding that kind of thing frustrating, give swivel cables a go. Just buy one and try it and see if you like it. Let me know if you have tried them and what you think of them, and if you haven't tried them, would you be interested in trying them, let me know in the comments below. I do have several videos on my YouTube channel. I will link the playlist below where I review different needle brands. So I have in the past reviewed Lykke, Nipro, several of the Nipro needle types, because they do so many now. I have a separate review, I think, of the Nipro Mindful collection when that first came out. Lantern Moon, Chogu, Haya, Lykke and Addi. The only ones I didn't like at all were the Addi ones, and in fact they're very different from all the other interchangeable needles. And in fact I bought 3 different ones, 3 cables and 3 needle tips to try, and I actually gave them away to somebody who loves Addi needles on Saturday. So I no longer have them because I find them too annoying. I don't think I have tried higher interchangeables, or I may have one pair of interchangeables. I don't use my higher needles a lot because I don't have that many of them. I don't know if higher do swivel cables. If you use higher and you know that they do swivel cables, let me know in the comments. It might help somebody who's looking for it. But I do have several needle reviews. I have a video on why and how to work with circular needles. So why would you want to use circular needles and how do you use them? And in that video I go through how to use them for knitting back and forth, knitting in the round, magic loop, and something called traveling loop. And I think there's also a separate video on magic loop. So if you're interested in any of that, let me know. I will do a video coming up soon on how to choose the right needles for you, because there's so much choice now and a lot of them are quite expensive. So it is important that you know which ones to choose for your needs and taste. So if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that video coming up soon. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing and leave me a comment with your views and comments on this topic. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.